Leela adjusted the strap of her worn-out apron as she hurriedly flipped the last pancake onto a plate. The smell of butter and syrup filled the tiny kitchen, but her mind was elsewhere. Her son Ethan sat at the small dining table, swinging his legs back and forth as he doodled on a piece of paper. At just 7 years old, Ethan had a way of lighting up even the darkest corners of her life. "Mom, look!" Ethan exclaimed, holding up a drawing of a rocket ship. "One day, I'm going to build one of these and we'll fly to the moon." Lila smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "That sounds amazing, buddy. But for now, let's focus on getting you to school on time." Life hadn't been easy for Lila. Once, she had dreamed of opening her own restaurant, a cozy little place where people could gather and enjoy her cooking. But those dreams had been put on hold when her husband walked out on her and Ethan 3 years ago. Since then, every day had been a balancing act, working long hours at a local diner, paying bills, and making sure Ethan never felt the weight of their struggles. As she packed Ethan's lunch, her phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from her friend, Clara. "Clara? Hey, I heard about a job opening. It's not cooking, but it pays well. You'd be helping someone recover from an accident. Interested?" Lila hesitated, her fingers hovering over the screen. She wasn't a nurse or a caregiver, but the thought of earning more money to give Ethan a better life was tempting. "Mom, are you okay?" Ethan's voice pulled her back to reality. She looked at him, his bright eyes full of curiosity and innocence. "Yeah, sweetie, just thinking about something." Taking a deep breath, she typed back, "Tell me more." Little did she know, this decision would lead her to a man who would change her life forever, a man who had once been at the top of the world but now lived in the shadows of his own pain. The diner was bustling with the usual morning crowd, coffee cups clinking, orders being shouted from the kitchen, and the hum of conversation filling the air. Lila moved quickly between tables, balancing plates of eggs and toast while offering polite smiles to the customers. Her feet ached, and the long hours were taking their toll, but she couldn't afford to slow down. "Leela, table 4 needs a refill," her manager barked from behind the counter. "Got it," she called back, grabbing the coffee pot and weaving through the crowded room. This was her life. Long shifts, low pay, and barely enough time to catch her breath. But every time she thought about giving up, she reminded herself why she was doing this. Ethan. That evening, after putting Ethan to bed, Lila sat at the small kitchen table, staring at the details Clara had sent her about the job. Private caregiver needed for a recovering patient. No medical experience required. Must be patient, reliable, and trustworthy. Pay, $25/hour. The pay was more than double what she made at the diner. It felt too good to be true. She called Clara, her voice hesitant. "Are you sure I'm qualified for this? I'm not a nurse or anything." Clara's voice was reassuring. "Lila, they're not looking for a professional. The guy just needs someone to help him with daily tasks. He's recovering from an accident and well, let's just say he's not the easiest person to deal with. But you're one of the most patient people I know. You'd be perfect for this." Lila sighed, glancing at the stack of unpaid bills on the counter. "I don't know, Clara. What if I mess it up?" "You won't," Clara insisted. "Just meet him. If it doesn't feel right, you can always say no." The next morning, after dropping Ethan off at school, Lila found herself standing in front of a sprawling estate on the outskirts of town. The house was massive, with ivy climbing up its stone walls and a long driveway that seemed to stretch forever. She clutched her coat tightly around her, feeling out of place in her simple attire. The door opened, and a stern-looking woman in her 60s greeted her. "You must be Lila," the woman said, her tone brisk. "I'm Mrs. Harper, Mr. Grayson's housekeeper. Follow me." Lila stepped inside, her eyes widening at the grandeur of the home. The high ceilings, polished floors, and elegant furniture were a stark contrast to her modest apartment. Mrs. Harper led her up a grand staircase and stopped in front of a closed door. "Mr. Grayson is in here. He doesn't like to be kept waiting." Lila nodded, her heart pounding as she pushed the door open. Inside, the room was dimly lit, with heavy curtains drawn over the windows. A man sat in a wheelchair near a desk, his back to her. His shoulders were broad, but his posture was slouched, as if the weight of the world rested on them. "Mr. Grayson," Leela said softly, stepping into the room. The man turned slowly, and Lila's breath caught. Elliot Grayson was not what she had expected. His face was sharp and handsome, but a deep scar ran from his temple to his jawline. His piercing blue eyes studied her with a mix of curiosity and irritation. "You're the caregiver?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. "Yes," Lila replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm Lila. The agency sent me." Elliot's gaze lingered on her for a moment before he turned back to the desk. "Fine. Let's get this over with." Leela swallowed hard, feeling the tension in the room. This wasn't going to be easy, but she had faced challenges before. She wasn't about to back down now. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. Lila stood awkwardly near the door, unsure of what to do next. Elliot Grayson, the man she had heard so much about, sat in his wheelchair, his back turned to her once again. His presence was intimidating, not because of his physical appearance, but because of the cold, distant energy he radiated. "Well?" Elliot's voice broke the silence, sharp and impatient. "Are you just going to stand there, or are you going to do your job?" Lila straightened her posture, forcing herself to stay calm. "I'm here to help, Mr. Grayson, but I'll need to know what you need from me." Elliot let out a dry laugh, though there was no humor in it. "What I need is to be left alone. But since that's apparently not an option, I suppose you can start by organizing those books." He gestured vaguely toward a pile of books stacked haphazardly on a nearby table. Lila nodded, walking over to the table and picking up the first book. As she worked, she couldn't help but steal glances at Elliot. His face was a mixture of sharp angles and shadows, the scar on his cheek catching the dim light. He looked like a man who had once been full of life, but was now weighed down by something heavy, something more than just the physical injuries he carried. "Do you always stare at people while you work?" Elliot's voice cut through her thoughts, and Lila felt her cheeks flush. "I wasn't staring," she said quickly, placing a book on the shelf. "I was just thinking." "Thinking about what?" he asked, his tone laced with skepticism. Lila hesitated, then decided to be honest. "About how hard this must be for you, losing so much and having to adjust to a new way of living." Elliot's expression darkened, and for a moment Lila thought she had crossed a line, but instead of snapping at her, he simply turned his wheelchair toward the window, his gaze distant. "You have no idea," he said quietly, almost to himself. The rest of the day passed in tense silence. Lila focused on her tasks, organizing the room and making sure Elliot had everything he needed. He barely spoke to her, and when he did, his words were clipped and cold. As she prepared to leave for the day, Lila paused by the door. "I'll be back tomorrow, Mr. Grayson. If there's anything specific you need, just let me know." Elliot didn't respond, his attention fixed on the window. Lila sighed and laughed, feeling a mix of frustration and sympathy. The next morning, Leela arrived at the estate with a renewed sense of determination. She wasn't going to let Elliot's attitude scare her off. She had faced worse challenges in her life, and she wasn't about to give up now. When she entered his room, she found him sitting at his desk, a blank sheet of paper in front of him. His hand rested on a pen, but he didn't seem to be writing. "Good morning," Leela said, her voice cheerful despite the tension in the air. Elliot glanced at her briefly before returning his gaze to the paper. "Morning," he muttered, his tone neutral. Lila decided to take a different approach. Instead of waiting for him to tell her what to do, she began tidying up the room, humming softly to herself as she worked. After a few minutes, Elliot spoke. "Do you always hum while you work?" Lila looked up, surprised. "Only when I'm in a good mood." Elliot raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly puts you in a good mood?" Lila smiled. "Knowing that I'm doing something meaningful. Helping people, even in small ways, makes me happy." Elliot didn't respond, but Lila noticed a flicker of something in his expression. Curiosity, perhaps, or maybe even a hint of admiration. As the days went on, Lila began to notice small changes in Elliot. He was still guarded and distant, but there were moments when his cold exterior seemed to crack. He would ask her questions about her life, though his tone remained detached. "Where did you take this job?" he asked one afternoon, as she adjusted the cushions on his wheelchair. Lila paused, considering her answer. "Because I needed the money," she admitted. "But also because I wanted to do something that mattered. My son, Ethan, is my whole world, and I want to give him a better life. This job is a step toward that." Elliot's gaze softened slightly at the mention of Ethan. "Your son, how old is he?" 7, Lila replied, a smile tugging at her lips. "He's smart, curious, and full of energy. He keeps me on my toes." For the first time, Elliot's lips curved into a faint smile. "Sounds like a handful." "And his," Lila said with a laugh. "But he's also the best thing that's ever happened to me." Elliot didn't say anything more, but Lila could sense that something had shifted between them. The walls he had built around himself were still there, but they didn't seem as impenetrable as before. It was a chilly morning when Lila found herself in a predicament. The babysitter she had arranged for Ethan had cancelled at the last minute, leaving her with no choice but to bring him along to the Grayson estate. She hesitated, unsure of how Elliot would react to having a child in his home. But with no other options, she bundled Ethan up in his coat and scarf and headed out. "Now, Ethan," she said as they walked up the long driveway. "Mr. Grayson is, well, he's not like most people. He's been through a lot, so I need you to be on your best behavior, okay?" Ethan nodded enthusiastically, his eyes wide as he took in the massive house. "Wow, Mom, this place looks like a castle." Lila smiled nervously, hoping Ethan's excitement wouldn't overwhelm Elliot. When Mrs. Harper opened the door, her sharp gaze immediately fell on Ethan. "Who's this?" she asked, her tone disapproving. "This is my son, Ethan," Lila explained quickly. "I couldn't find a sitter today, but I promise he'll stay out of the way." Mrs. Harper pursed her lips, but stepped aside to let them in. "Mr. Grayson doesn't usually like visitors," she warned. Lila nodded, taking Ethan's hand as they made their way upstairs. Elliot was sitting by the window when Lila entered the room. He turned his head slightly, his eyes narrowing as he noticed the small figure peeking out from behind her. "Who's that?" he asked, his voice low and cautious. "This is my son, Ethan," Lila said, her tone apologetic. "I'm so sorry for bringing him here, but I didn't have anyone to watch him today. He'll stay quiet, I promise." Ethan, however, had other plans. He stepped out from behind his mother and looked up at Elliot with wide, curious eyes. "Hi, Mr. Grayson. My mom says you're a writer. That's so cool." Elliot blinked, clearly taken aback by the boy's boldness. "I used to be," he said after a moment. "What kind of books did you write?" Ethan asked, his excitement undeterred. "Ethan," Lila said quickly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Remember what we talked about? Let's not bother Mr. Grayson." But to her surprise, Elliot didn't seem annoyed. Instead, he leaned back in his wheelchair, studying Ethan with a mix of curiosity and amusement. "I wrote stories about adventure," he said finally, "about people who faced impossible odds and found a way to overcome them." Ethan's eyes lit up. "That sounds awesome. Do you have any of your books here? Can I read one?" Elliot's lips twitched, almost forming a smile. "Maybe later," he said. As the day went on, Ethan's presence seemed to bring a new energy to the house. His laughter echoed through the halls as he explored the library and asked Elliot endless questions about writing. Lila watched in amazement as Elliot, who had always been so cold and distant, actually engaged with her son. At one point, Ethan found a stack of blank paper and a set of colored pencils in the library. "Can I draw something for you, Mr. Grayson?" he asked eagerly. Elliot raised an eyebrow. "For me?" "Yeah. You can hang it up in your room. It'll make it look less boring." Lila's eyes widened in horror. Ethan, she scolded, but Elliot let out a low chuckle. It's fine, he said, waving a hand dismissively. He's not wrong. Ethan grinned and got to work, his small hands moving quickly as he sketched. When he was finished, he held up the drawing proudly. Look, it's you, me, and Mom going on an adventure. Elliot took the drawing, his expression softening as he studied it. The stick figures were crude, but there was something endearing about the way Ethan had drawn them all, smiling. Thank you, Ethan, Elliot said quietly. I'll keep it. That evening, as Lila prepared to leave, she noticed a change in Elliot's demeanor. He seemed lighter, as if a small part of the weight he carried had been lifted. Thank you for being patient with Ethan today, she said, her voice sincere. I know it wasn't part of the plan. Elliot shook his head. He's a good kid. Reminds me of someone I used to know. Lila tilted her head, curious. Who? Elliot hesitated, his gaze distant. My nephew. He was about Ethan's age when I last saw him. Full of energy, always asking questions. He used to call me Uncle L. What happened? Layla asked gently. Elliot's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer, but then he sighed. After the accident, I pushed everyone away. My family, my friends, even him. I didn't want them to see me like this. Lila's heart ached for him. I'm sure they'd still want to be there for you, Elliot. Sometimes the people we love just want to help, even if we don't think we deserve it. Elliot didn't respond, but the look in his eyes told her that her words had struck a chord. Over the next few days, Ethan continued to accompany Lila to the estate. Each time he brought a new burst of life into the house, and Elliot seemed to grow more comfortable with his presence. The once-icky tension between Lila and Elliot began to thaw, replaced by a quiet understanding. One afternoon, as Lila was tidying up the library, she overheard Ethan and Elliot talking. Do you think you'll ever write another book? Ethan asked, his voice full of hope. Elliot was silent for a moment before replying. I don't know. It's been a long time since I've written anything. But you should, Ethan insisted. You're really smart, and I bet your stories are amazing. Mom always says we shouldn't give up on the things we love. Lila froze, her heart swelling at her son's words. She glanced over and saw Elliot looking at Ethan with an expression she couldn't quite place. Something between gratitude and longing. Maybe, Elliot said softly. Maybe I will. The days at the Grayson estate began to take on a new rhythm. What had once been a cold, silent house now felt alive with the sound of Ethan's laughter and the quiet conversations that had started to blossom between Lila and Elliot. The walls Elliot had built around himself were still there, but they were no longer impenetrable. One afternoon, as Lila was helping Elliot adjust the cushions on his wheelchair, he broke the silence with a question that caught her off guard. Well, do you keep doing this? He asked, his voice low but steady. Lila paused, her hands stilling for a moment. Doing what? Coming here, putting up with me. You could have walked away the first day, but you didn't. Why? Lila straightened, meeting his gaze. Because I see someone who's hurting Elliot, and I know what that feels like. I've been there. Elliot's eyes narrowed slightly, as if trying to read her. What do you mean? Lila hesitated, but then she took a deep breath. When my husband left, I felt like my whole world had fallen apart. I had to figure out how to keep going, not just for me, but for Ethan. There were days when I didn't think I could do it, but I didn't have a choice. I had to keep moving forward. Elliot was silent, his expression unreadable. Lila continued, her voice soft but firm. I don't know everything you've been through, but I do know that you don't have to go through it alone. Sometimes, letting someone in can make all the difference. For a moment, Elliot didn't say anything, then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. Maybe you're right, he said quietly. The next day, Leela arrived at the estate to find Elliot in the library, surrounded by stacks of papers and books. He looked up as she entered, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Good morning," he said, his tone lighter than she had ever heard it. "Good morning," Layla replied, surprised by his mood. "What's all this?" Elliot gestured to the papers. "I've been thinking about what Ethan said the other day, about writing again." Lila's eyes widened. "You're going to write another book?" "Maybe," Elliot said, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "It's been a long time, but I think I want to try." Lila smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "That's amazing, Elliot. I think it's a great idea." Elliot looked at her, his gaze steady. "You and Ethan, you've both reminded me of something I thought I'd lost. Hope." As the days turned into weeks, the bond between Lila, Ethan, and Elliot grew stronger. Elliot began to open up more, sharing stories about his past and the accident that had changed his life. One evening, as they sat in the library, Elliot told Lila about the night of the accident. "I was driving home from an awards ceremony," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "I'd just won a major literary prize. I should have been on top of the world, but I was distracted. I wasn't paying attention, and the next thing I knew, I woke up in a hospital bed." Lila listened intently, her heart aching for him. "It wasn't your fault, Elliot," she said gently. "Maybe not," he replied, his gaze distant. "But it doesn't change the fact that I lost everything that night. My career, my independence, my wife." Lila's breath caught. "Your wife?" Elliot nodded, his jaw tightening. "She was in the car with me. She didn't make it." Lila reached out, placing a hand on his. "I'm so sorry, Elliot. I can't imagine how hard that must have been." Elliot looked down at their hands, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent the last 3 years blaming myself, pushing everyone away because I didn't think I deserved their forgiveness. But now, I'm starting to wonder if maybe it's time to stop running." One afternoon, Elliot surprised Lila and Ethan with an invitation. "There's a place I'd like to take you both," he said, his tone hesitant but hopeful. "Where?" Lila asked, curious. "It's a park just outside the city," Elliot explained. "I used to go there when I needed inspiration for my writing. I haven't been back since the accident, but I think I'm ready." Lila smiled, touched by his vulnerability. "We'd love to go." The next day, they set off for the park. The air was crisp, and the trees were beginning to shed their leaves, painting the ground in shades of red and gold. Ethan ran ahead, his laughter echoing through the quiet paths. Elliot watched him with a soft smile. "He reminds me of myself when I was his age," he said. Lila glanced at him, surprised. "You were like Ethan?" Elliot chuckled. "Believe it or not, I was. Always curious, always asking questions. My parents used to say I had a wild imagination." Lila laughed. "Well, it seems like that imagination served you well." Elliot's smile faded slightly, and he looked down at his hands. "I used to think so, but after the accident, I stopped believing in my own stories. I stopped believing in myself." Lila placed a hand on his arm. "You're still that person, Elliot. The accident didn't take that away from you, it just put it on pause." Elliot looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and something deeper, something unspoken. As they sat on a bench, watching Ethan play in the distance, Elliot turned to Lila. "You've changed my life, you know," he said quietly. Lila's heart skipped a beat. "I haven't done anything special," she said, her voice soft. "You have," Elliot insisted. "You and Ethan. You've reminded me that there's still good in the world, that there's still something worth fighting for." Lila felt a lump rise in her throat. "You've changed too, Elliot. You're not the same man I met that first day. You're stronger than you think." For a moment they sat in silence, the weight of their words hanging in the air. Then, slowly, Elliot reached out and took her hand. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. Lila squeezed his hand, a small smile playing on her lips. "You're welcome." The weeks that followed were filled with progress and hope. Elliot had started writing again, his desk now cluttered with pages of notes and drafts. Lila and Ethan continued to visit the estate daily, their presence bringing warmth and life to a house that had once felt so empty. But as things seemed to be improving, an unexpected challenge arose. One afternoon, as Lila was helping Mrs. Harper in the kitchen, she overheard a phone conversation that made her stomach drop. "Yes, Mr. Grayson's brother called earlier," Mrs. Harper said, her voice low but firm. "He's insisting on taking over Elliot's care. Says it's time for him to move back with the family." Lila froze, her heart pounding. She hadn't realized how much she had come to care for Elliot, not just as an employer, but as a friend. The thought of him being uprooted from the progress he had made was unbearable. When Mrs. Harper hung up, Lila approached her cautiously. "What's going on?" she asked. Mrs. Harper sighed, her expression grim. "Elliot's brother Charles has been pressuring him to leave the estate and move in with the family. He thinks Elliot can't take care of himself here, even with help." Layla frowned. "But Elliot's doing so well. He's writing again, he's opening up. Doesn't his brother see that?" "Charles has always been controlling," Mrs. Harper said with a shake of her head. "He means well, but he doesn't understand what Elliot needs." Lila felt a surge of determination. She wasn't going to let Elliot lose everything he had worked so hard to rebuild. That evening, Lila found Elliot in the library, staring at a blank page. He looked up as she entered, his expression weary. "Elliot," she began carefully, "Mrs. Harper told me about your brother." Elliot's jaw tightened, and he looked away. "Of course she did. Is it true? Is he trying to make you leave?" Elliot sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Charles thinks he's helping. He's always been the one to take charge, especially after the accident. But I don't want to leave, Lila. This is my home. It's where I feel safe." "Then don't let him make that decision for you," Lila said firmly. "You've come so far, Elliot. You're writing again. You're reconnecting with the world. Don't let anyone take that away from you." Elliot looked at her, his eyes filled with doubt. "What if he's right? What if I can't do this on my own?" "You are not on your own," Lila said, her voice steady. "You have me. You have Ethan. And you have yourself. You're stronger than you think, Elliot." For a long moment, Elliot didn't say anything. Then, slowly, he nodded. "You're right," he said quietly. "I can't let him control my life anymore." The next day, Charles arrived at the estate, his presence as commanding as Lila had imagined. He was tall and impeccably dressed, his sharp features giving him an air of authority. "Elliot," Charles said as he entered the library, his tone brisk, "we need to talk." Elliot sat in his wheelchair, his posture tense but resolute. "I know why you're here, Charles, and the answer is no." Charles raised an eyebrow. "No? Elliot, you can't stay here forever. You need proper care, and the family is willing to provide it." "I have proper care," Elliot said firmly. "Lila has been helping me, and I've made more progress in the past few months than I have in years. I'm not leaving." Charles glanced at Lila, his expression skeptical. "With all due respect, Elliot, you need more than a part-time caregiver. You need a full support system." "I have a support system," Elliot said, his voice steady. "And I'm not going to let you take that away from me." For a moment, Charles looked as though he might argue further. But then he sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. "If that's what you want, Elliot, I won't force you, but promise me you'll take care of yourself." "I will," Elliot said, his tone softening. "Thank you, Charles." After Charles left, Lila found Elliot in the garden, a rare smile on his face. "You stood up to him," she said, her voice filled with pride. "I did," Elliot replied, a hint of amazement in his tone. "For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm in control of my own life." Lila smiled, her heart swelling with happiness for him. "You deserve that, Elliot. You've worked so hard to get here." Elliot looked at her, his expression serious. "I couldn't have done it without you, Lila. You and Ethan. You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever. a reason to keep going. Leela felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. You've given us just as much, Elliot. You've shown Ethan what it means to be brave, and you've reminded me that it's never too late to start over. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. The connection between them, deeper than words could express. In the weeks that followed, Elliot continued to write, his confidence growing with each passing day. He even began to share his work with Lila, who was amazed by the depth and beauty of his stories. One evening, as they sat in the library, Elliot handed her a freshly typed page. "This is the opening to my new book," he said, his voice tinged with both excitement and nervousness. Lila took the page, her eyes scanning the words. As she read, she felt a lump rise in her throat. The story was about a man who had lost everything but found hope again through the kindness of strangers. "He's beautiful," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Elliot smiled, his eyes shining. "It's because of you, Lila. You and Ethan gave me the inspiration to write again." Lila reached out, placing a hand on his. "We're so proud of you, Elliot, and we'll always be here for you." The story ends with a sense of hope and renewal. Elliot's new book is published, and it becomes a symbol of his journey, a testament to the power of resilience and the importance of human connection. As for Leela and Ethan, they remain a constant presence in Elliot's life, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. Together, they prove that even in the face of tragedy, it's possible to find light and love again. Thank you so much for watching this story on Emma's Stories. If you enjoyed it and want to hear more heartfelt, inspiring tales, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to share more amazing stories with you. See you in the next one.